What if the very thing you loved most was the thing destined to kill you? This wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning, a premonition of a darkness that had been waiting for her long before she was even born. The story opens in a void of absolute darkness. We see a young woman named Kinara walking forward into an abandoned industrial complex. The air was stale, thick with the scent of rust and ancient decay. Every step she took echoed into an unseen abyss. She didn't know how she got there, and honestly, that was the most terrifying part. The amnesia of fear. The silence was heavy, pressing against her eardrums like a physical weight, until she heard it. The faint, rhythmic sound of traditional gamelan music, haunting and hypnotic. She followed the sound, drawn by an invisible thread of fate. Overhead, old industrial lights began to flicker, buzzing like angry hornets, illuminating the peeling paint and the crumbling concrete. In the center of the room stood a dancer. She was dressed in full traditional Javanese attire, her face obscured by a mask of gold, her movements fluid and mesmerizing. But as Kinara stepped closer, desperate for a sign of life, the dancer spun around in a movement that defied gravity. She ripped the mask off. Her face wasn't a face at all. It was a hollow, rotting void of malice, with empty sockets where eyes should have been. The music screeched, turning discordant. Kinara tried to run, but her feet felt like lead, anchored to the ground by unseen hands. Before she could scream, a towering shadow loomed over her, swallowing her whole. And then she woke up. Kinara gasped, her chest heaving, her shirt drenched in cold sweat. She was back in her boarding school dormitory. The fan above her head rotated lazily, cutting through the humid air. This was the third time this week she'd had the exact same dream. And with every iteration, the details became clearer and the terror more visceral. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just stress, a manifestation of her recent heartbreak. Thirsty and shaking, she grabbed a water bottle and crept into the hallway. The corridor was empty, bathed in that eerie blue light of midnight that makes familiar places look foreign. As she stood at the water cooler, the machine hummed a low, mechanical drone. Glug, 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 but then a noise echoed behind her. A soft, wet slap, like a bare foot hitting the tile. She spun around. Nothing but the long, empty hallway stretching into darkness. She turned back to the water, her hands trembling violently. That's when she saw it, a shadow standing in the light cast on the wall. It was distinct, human-shaped, but there was no one standing there to cast it. The shadow stood still, then slowly raised a song-distorted finger, pointing at her. Panic seized her throat, choking her breath. She turned to flee when a hand clamped down on her shoulder, tight as a vice. She screamed, a choked, desperate sound dropping the plastic bottle. It clattered loudly, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Surprise! Happy birthday! The lights flicked on, blinding her for a second. It was Ayu, her best friend, laughing hysterically, clutching her sides. Kinara's heart was still hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced a smile, trying to ground herself in reality. It was her birthday. Ayu had orchestrated this mini heart attack to celebrate. Kinara tried to laugh it off, but the dread in her stomach wouldn't settle. It was her birthday, yes, and she was alone in the dorms because she refused to go home. Why? Because going home meant facing the memories of her ex-boyfriend, the man who had shattered her trust. He had cheated on her with a dancer, another irony that stung deep. Kinara used to be a dancer too. It was her life, her passion. Now, the thought of dancing just made her sick, a reminder of betrayal. Seeing her friend so lonely and broken, Ayu made a suggestion as they sat on the floor eating instant noodles. "Come to my village," she said, her eyes bright with hope. "It's the village of dancers. You'll love it. It's peaceful, away from the city noise. It might help you heal." Kinara hesitated. She knew nothing about Ayu's family or where she came from, but the thought of staying alone in this haunted dorm wasn't appealing. After some persuading, she agreed. Before leaving, Kinara decided to pack her old dance gear, thinking maybe she could burn it or leave it behind for good. She opened a dusty box in her closet, pulling out her old costumes. The fabric felt like ghosts of her past. A photo slipped out from the bottom of the pile. It was him, her ex, and the girl he left her for. They looked happy. A wave of nausea hit her, followed by a sharp pang of anger. She shoved the photo away and decided to do a quick search on Ayu's village, just to know what she was walking into. What she found was disturbing. The village was famous for producing world-class dancers. Yes, it had a rich cultural history, but it was also notorious for something else, something the tourism blogs glossed over. A headline from 10 years ago caught her eye. "Young dancer vanishes without a trace during lunar eclipse." The article detailed the disappearance of a girl named Rati. She was a promising talent, adored by the village. Then, one night, she simply evaporated. No body, no clues, just gone. The girl in the photo, attached to the article, looked hauntingly familiar. Kinara felt a cold shiver trace her spine, a primal warning. She stared at the screen, the pixels of the grainy photo blurring slightly. But she closed the laptop quickly. It was probably nothing, just a tragic old story from a remote place. She couldn't let paranoia ruin her escape. The next day, before they left for the village, they stopped by a bustling market on the outskirts of the city. Kinara wandered away from Ayu, drawn towards a narrow alleyway she hadn't noticed before. At the end of it stood an antique shop. It was a damp, cramped space filled with relics of the past, broken clocks, dusty mirrors, and idols with missing limbs. The air inside was frigid, smelling of mothballs and dried flowers. A specific shawl caught her eye, a bright red silk garment used by traditional dancers, draped over a mannequin. It was beautiful, intricate, yet it radiated a strange heat. She reached out and touched it. The fabric felt unnaturally warm, almost pulsating like a heartbeat. Suddenly, an old woman appeared from the shadows behind the counter. She moved without making a sound. She smiled, revealing a mouth with too few teeth, her eyes milky and distant. "The shawl has chosen you," the woman whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. Before Kinara could protest or ask the price, the woman reached over the counter. With surprising speed, she pinned an antique hairpin, a golden Keres design, into Kinara's hair. "No payment needed," the woman rasped, her grip on Kinara's wrist tight. "These belong to you now. You and the shawl are one. You will never be apart." Kinara walked out, confused but oddly compelled, the shawl clutched in her hand. She met Ayu outside the alley, breathless. When she showed Ayu the shawl and the pin, Ayu's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as if she'd seen a corpse. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Kinara, you shouldn't take things from old shops here, especially not things that look like that. This looks like it belongs to the dead." Kinara turned back to point at the shop, to show Ayu the harmless old woman and prove her wrong. But the shop wasn't there. In its place was a boarded-up storefront, covered in years of grime and vines. The windows were shattered, the wood was rotting. A large, weathered "For Rent" sign hung crookedly on the rusted gate. It looked like it hadn't been open in decades. The alleyway was empty. Kinara stood frozen, the shawl burning in her hand. And if you pay close attention here, you'll realize the truth was hidden from the very beginning. The shawl in her bag seemed to grow heavier with every step she took away from that spot. That evening, deciding to leave the creepy shawl behind, Kinara stuffed it into her school locker and slammed the door shut. She locked it. She wasn't taking it to the village, or so she thought. The journey to Ayu's village was long and arduous. They took a bus for hours, then transferred to a rickety jeep that rattled their bones. By the time they arrived at the jungle path leading to the house, a torrential downpour had begun. The sky turned a bruised purple, and thunder cracked like whips overhead. They ran through the mud, slipping and sliding, seeking shelter under a small, dilapidated gazebo in the woods near the village entrance. Kinara shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. The air here was different, heavier. It smelled of burning wood, wet earth, and something metallic, like old blood. Suddenly, she heard it again, the music from her dream. It was faint, playing somewhere deep in the trees, weaving through the sound of the rain. "Kinara, come on!" Ayu yelled, pulling her away. "My house is just ahead. Don't listen to it." They burst into the house, soaking wet. Ayu's mother greeted them warmly, bustling about with towels and hot tea. She was a sweet woman, desperate to make a good impression. But the atmosphere shifted drastically when Ayu's father, Ridwan, entered the room. He didn't look happy to see his daughter, and when his eyes landed on Kinara, the look was pure, unadulterated fear. He stared at her like she was a walking corpse, a messenger of doom. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. It wasn't just hostility, it was recognition. He looked terrified of her. He quickly turned away, muttering something under his breath, and left the room. Ayu apologized for her father's behavior, blaming his strict, antisocial nature, but Kinara knew that look. That wasn't just strictness, that was the look of a man seeing a ghost. That night, as they settled in, Kinara tried to sleep, but the house was alive with sounds, creaking wood, whispering winds. A dripping sound kept her awake. Drip, drip, drip. Water was leaking from the ceiling directly above the bed. She grabbed a bucket from the kitchen to catch the water. On her way back, she passed a locked room in the hallway. The door was heavy, oak wood, bound by iron. She paused. She felt a magnetic pull towards that door, a hum in her blood. She reached out to touch the handle. Suddenly, Ridwan was standing there, blocking her path. He seemed to materialize out of the shadows. "Go back to your room," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "That room is forbidden. Never touch this door." Kinara retreated, terrified by the intensity in his eyes. But back in Ayu's room, she reached into her bag to grab her phone charger, and her hand brushed against something silky and warm. She pulled it out. Her blood ran cold. It was the red shawl, the one she had locked in her school locker hundreds of miles away. It was sitting in her bag, as fresh and vibrant as the moment she touched it in the shop. How? Before she could process the impossible, the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath misted in the air. A scream tore through the house. It wasn't Ayu. It was coming from the living room. Kinara rushed out, bucket in hand. She saw Ridwan sitting on the sofa, his back to her, The lights flickered violently. "Sir?" she whispered. He slowly turned his head. It rotated too far, cracking the vertebrae. His eyes were gone, replaced by solid, milky white spheres. His skin was grey, peeling. He wasn't Ridwan. He was something else, a doppelganger. "You brought it back," the thing whispered in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Kinara stumbled back, tripping over her own feet. The entity stood up, floating inches off the ground, lunging at her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for death. Then silence. She opened her eyes. The room was normal. Ridwan was gone. The real Ridwan was fast asleep in his room, unaware of the doppelganger that wore his face. But Kinara was wide awake, trembling. She didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. The next morning, Ayu, sensing Kinara's distress, dragged her to the village dance school. Kinara didn't want to go. Dancing reminded her of her ex, but Ayu insisted it would be therapeutic. Inside the open-air pavilion, they met Madame Sati, the stern instructor, and Dirja, a young musician playing the traditional instruments. Dirja was handsome, intense, with brooding eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off Kinara. There was an instant electric connection, but laced with sadness. As the children practiced their routines, Kinara watched from the corner. The rhythmic movement was hypnotic. Then she saw it, in the large mirror behind the dancers, the ghost from her dream. The rotting dancer was standing right there in the reflection, mimicking the movements, her hollow eyes locked on Kinara's. Kinara gasped, and the figure vanished, leaving only her own pale reflection. She ran outside, gasping for air. Ayu followed, concerned. It was time for the truth. Ayu took her to a quiet spot by a river and told her the legend of the village. "The locked room in my house belonged to my late uncle, Banyo," Ayu began, her voice shaking. Banyo was a brilliant dancer. He fell in love with a girl named Rati. They were the golden couple of the village. But the village was superstitious. When a sickness swept through the crops, the villagers blamed Banyo. They claimed he practiced black magic to steal Rati's talent. They dragged him to the village square and burned him alive. Rati vanished that same night, Ayu continued. Some say she ran away. Others say she killed herself in grief. And ever since then, every 10 years, a dancer goes missing. The villagers believe Banyo's vengeful spirit returns to claim a sacrifice. Kinara felt the color drain from her face. "And the shawl you have," Ayu whispered, pointing to Kinara's bag, "that belonged to Rati. My mother recognized the pin." Kinara was a dancer. She was holding Rati's shawl. She was the perfect vessel. That night, the haunting escalated. Kinara heard singing, a beautiful melancholic voice calling her name. "Kinara, come dance." She tried to wake Ayu, but Ayu slept like the dead, drugged by exhaustion. Kinara walked in a trance, her feet moving on their own, towards the locked room. The door, usually bolted shut, clicked open. Click! She stepped inside. The room was frozen in time. Photos of Banyo and Rati lined the walls, their eyes following her. In the center lay a burnt diary on an altar. Kinara opened it. The pages crumbled under her touch, but one sentence was clear. 2 souls, 1 love, 1 revenge. The blood of the innocent cleanses the sin. Suddenly, the room spun. The ghost of Rati appeared, floating above the floor, her body glowing with a faint blue light. "Dance with me," the spirit whispered. Kinara's body betrayed her. Her arms began to move on their own. Her legs followed. She was performing the Narik Sukmo, the dance of the dead souls. It was graceful, yet horrific. She was a puppet, and Rati held the strings. She levitated off the floor, spinning in the air, her face contorted in pain. Ayu woke up and found the door open. She screamed when she saw Kinara floating, dancing in mid-air, tears streaming down her face. Ridwan and his wife rushed in, alerted by the scream. They splashed holy water, chanting prayers furiously. The water hissed as it hit Kinara. The connection broke, and Kinara collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "I won't stay here another second," Kinara sobbed later that night, clutching her bag. "We have to leave, now." Ridwan tried to stop them. "You can't leave at night. The jungle isn't safe. The spirits are out." But Ayu was defiant. She didn't trust her father anymore. She thought he was just trying to keep them there for the ritual. She grabbed Kinara and they fled into the storm, running towards the jeep. They didn't make it far. Figures emerged from the trees, men with torches and machetes. They weren't spirits, they were men. They attacked the car, smashing the windows. Kinara felt a sharp blow to the back of her head, and the world went black. When she woke up, she was lying on a bed in an unfamiliar room. It was dimly lit, smelling of incense. Dirja was sitting by the window, cleaning a cut on his arm. "You're safe," he said softly, turning to her. "Ridwan's men attacked you. They were trying to take you back for the ritual, but I found you first." Kinara was confused. "Ridwan? Her friend's father?" "It's true," Dirja said, his face grim. "He's obsessed with the old ritual. He wants to sacrifice you to appease the spirits. I heard them talking. I couldn't let them do it." Kinara felt sick, but then a memory tugged at her. The look on Ridwan's face yesterday, it wasn't malice, it was fear. It was the look of a man trying to prevent a disaster, not cause one. "Where is Ayu?" she asked, sitting up. Dirja looked away, hesitation in his eyes. "They took her back to the house. She's collateral." Kinara didn't trust the silence in this room. It felt like a cage. She stood up and peeked out the door, staying in the shadows. She saw Dirja talking to a man in the hallway, a man with a commanding presence, a scar running down his face. "The ritual must happen tonight," the man growled. "Make sure she doesn't escape until the eclipse. We need her at the altar." Dirja nodded. "I have her under control." It was a trap. Dirja wasn't the hero. He was working with his uncle, Adi, the man with the scar, and they were delivering Kinara straight to the slaughter. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ayu had regained consciousness. She was frantic, searching for her father. She found him in the forbidden room, staring at Banyo's photo with tears in his eyes. "Father, tell me the truth," she cried. "Who is doing this?" Ridwan turned, his face streaked with tears, looking broken and old. He handed her the burnt diary he had been holding. "It wasn't the villagers who killed Banyo," Ridwan confessed, his voice cracking. "It was Adi, Dirja's uncle." The truth poured out like poison. Adi, Dirja's uncle, had always loved Rati, but Rati loved Banyo. Jealous and power-hungry, Adi poisoned the crops and blamed Banyo. He incited the mob to burn him alive, claiming it was justice. Then he kidnapped Rati, hiding her away, hoping she would eventually love him. But Rati, heartbroken and abused, took her own life, vowing revenge. Her spirit merged with Banyo's pain. Adi has been using the curse to control the village ever since, Ridwan wept. He sacrifices a dancer every 10 years, not to appease the ghost, but to steal their life force, to stay young, to stay in power. I tried to stop him, but he threatened to kill you, Ayu. That's why I kept you away. That's why I was cold. I was trying to protect you from the truth. Adi is coming, Ridwan said, grabbing a machete, his fear replaced by a father's rage. I won't let him hurt you or your friend. He told Ayu to hide and lock the doors. Then he ran into the storm, heading toward the old ritual grounds, the very place where his brother died to save Kinara. The ritual site was a clearing in the jungle, lit by a ring of fire. Adi stood in the center, chanting in a guttural tongue. Kinara was tied to a wooden post, the red shawl draped over her shoulders, soaked in the rain. The energy in the air was electric, suffocating. The lunar eclipse was beginning, the moon turning a blood red. Dirja stood nearby, his face conflicted. He looked at Kinara, trembling with fear, and then at his uncle, consumed by madness. He had been told this was tradition, necessary for the village, but seeing Kinara there, he hesitated. The moon began to fade into the shadow, signaling the time of the sacrifice. Adi raised a jagged dagger, the blade glinting in the firelight. Now, he roared, the blood of the dancer. He lunged toward Kinara, but a figure burst from the tree line, Ridwan. He tackled Adi, knocking the knife away into the mud. They rolled on the ground, grappling in the rain. Run, Kinara! Ridwan shouted, fighting off Adi's guards, who rushed to intervene. Kinara struggled against her ropes. The shawl on her shoulders began to glow, vibrating with a low hum. A sudden wind howled through the clearing, extinguishing some of the torches. The fire roared, turning blue. Rati's voice echoed in Kinara's mind, clear and powerful. Dance, set us free. Kinara's ropes snapped as if burned by invisible fire. She didn't run. She stood up, her eyes rolling back, turning white. She began to dance. But this wasn't the dance of a victim. It was the dance of the avenger. As she spun, her movements controlled the wind. Spectral figures appeared around her, Banyo and Rati holding hands, their forms translucent and terrifying. They danced with her, creating a vortex of energy that knocked the guards back. Adi watched in horror as his power was challenged. "Stop her!" he screamed, scrambling for the knife. Dirya stepped forward, but instead of grabbing Kinara, he turned to Adi. "You killed my sister!" Dirya growled, tears in his eyes. "Rati was my sister. You told me she ran away. You lied about everything." Adi's eyes widened. "You fool! I did it for us, for power." Dirya lunged, fighting his uncle in the mud. The struggle was fierce, fueled by years of betrayal. Adi, in a blind rage, grabbed a torch and threw it toward Kinara, intending to burn the vessel and the spirits together. "No!" Ridwan jumped in front of the flames, shielding Kinara. The fire caught his clothes. He screamed, rolling on the ground. Kinara, still in a trance, finished her final movement. She pointed a finger at Adi. The spirits of Banyo and Rati screamed, a sound that shattered the glass of the jungle and descended upon Adi. Adi was lifted into the air by invisible hands. He clawed at his throat, gasping for air that wasn't there. The spirits wrapped around him, dragging him down into the earth, into the mud, where Banyo had burned. The ground opened slightly, swallowing Adi's screams until there was only silence. The fire spread rapidly, fueled by the ceremonial oil. The clearing became an inferno. Kinara's trance broke. She saw Ridwan on the ground, badly burned. "Ridwan!" she cried, crawling toward him. Dirja helped pull them to safety, just as the altar collapsed in flames. Dawn broke over the ruined village. The smoke cleared, revealing the cost of the night. Ridwan lay on the grass, his breath shallow, Ayu ran to him, sobbing. "I tried," he whispered, his voice a rattle. "I tried to stop him. I'm sorry, Banyo. I'm sorry, Rati." He took Ayu's hand, then Kinara's. "Don't be afraid anymore. The curse, it's gone. Live your life." And with a final, ragged breath, the man who had lived in fear for 20 years finally found peace. He was gone. The village was silent. The curse was broken, but the price was too high. A few days later, Kinara and Ayu stood by Ridwan's grave on a hill overlooking the village. The villagers now knew the truth. Adi was the monster, not the ghosts. They looked at Ayu with pity and regret, bowing their heads in shame. Kinara felt a strange hollowness. The nightmare was over, yet the scars remained. They walked towards the car that would take them back to the city. Dirja was driving them. "I'm coming with you," Dirja said quietly, leaning against the car door. "There's nothing left for me here. My uncle, he took everything. I need to start over." Ayu gave Kinara a knowing look through her tears. Despite the horror, a bond had formed between Kinara and Dirja, a shared trauma, and maybe the start of something new. Kinara got into the back seat. She opened her bag to put on her sunglasses, but her breath hitched. There, folded neatly at the bottom of her bag, was the red shawl. It glowed softly in the morning light, the gold embroidery shimmering. It was dry, pristine, and waiting. She had thrown it into the river just yesterday. She had watched it sink into the dark water. Kinara stared at the fabric, her skin crawling with a familiar dread. The car engine started, purring as they drove away from the village. Kinara looked out the window at the retreating trees, the shadows lengthening as the car picked up speed. Even though everything seemed over, something about it still didn't feel finished. She didn't tell Ayu, she didn't tell Dirja. She just closed her bag slowly, her fingers brushing the silk one last time, feeling the faint, rhythmic pulse of a heartbeat beneath the fabric. Because in the end, the real horror wasn't what they saw. It was what never left them.